You can start allowing guests.
Yeah, I was just waiting for others to just join. So we have
You can
Kansha
start allowing
here.
guests.
Yeah, I was just waiting for others to just join. So we have, can you unmute?
You can
Kansha
start allowing
here.
guests.
Hello,
Yeah, I
sir.
was
Hi.
just waiting for others to just join. So we have, can you unmute? I was waiting for Dr. Naveen to join. Kansha here.
Guests.
Hello,
Yeah, I
sir.
was
Hi.
just waiting for others to just join. So we have, can you unmute? I was waiting for Dr. Naveen to join. Kansha here.
Guests.
Hello,
Yeah, I
sir.
was
Hi.
just waiting for others to just join. So we have, can you unmute? I was waiting for Dr. Naveen to join. Kansha here.
Guests.
Hello,
Yeah, I
sir.
was
Hi.
just waiting for others to just join. So we have, can you unmute? I was waiting for Dr. Naveen to join. Kansha here.
Guests.
Yeah, I was just waiting for others to just join. So we have, can you unmute? I was waiting for Dr. Naveen to join. Kansha here.
Guests.
Yeah, I was just waiting for others to just join. So we have, can you unmute? I was waiting for Dr. Naveen to join. Kansha here. Yeah, I was just waiting for others to just join. So we have, can you unmute? I was waiting for Dr. Naveen to join. Kansha here. Yeah, I was just waiting for others to just join. So we have, can you unmute? I was waiting for Dr. Naveen to join. Hi Naveen, could you talk? You can unmute yourself and Dr. Naveen. Okay. Hello, Dr. Naveen, can you unmute? Any idea what's happening with Dr. Naveen?
Sir, I've just texted him. I think he's joined, but I'll just give me 1 second.
Yeah, sure. Okay, he has left the meeting.
I'm trying to call him, sir. Just a second. नवीन, can you rejoin? I think आपका exit हो गया. Just
Okay.
one second. Sir, it shows someone will. He's saying that it says someone will let you in.
Okay, hold on. I just want to make, before I let everybody in, I just want to make sure that you guys have a, you guys can talk. Hold on.
Sir, I think he's joined now. He's in.
Okay, hold on now. So I'll.
Will learn a lot, and we wanted this to the benefits of this session to be available to outside students also, so we've made it open to the wider group. So first of all, let me welcome everybody who has joined in for this session. And I'll start off with congratulating the Economic Division of the Ministry of Finance for completing this big challenging task of preparing an economic survey for an economy that is as large and complex as ours. It's a very big task, and I extend our congratulations to the entire team, specifically, of course, to the leader, Dr. Krishnamurthy Subramanian. I'm sure our wishes will be extended to him, will reach him. And thank you, Dr. Sanjeev Sanyal, for suggesting this session. It was a very good idea, and I'm glad we're able to have it. It's also good to know that many of the findings of the survey have actually been incorporated in the budget, which in recent years has not so much been the case. So it's good to see a match up between the survey and the budget presentation. Very quick introduction of our two speakers today. Ms. Akanksha Arora, who is the Deputy Director in the Economic Division of the Department of Economic Affairs. She's been there for just over 6 years. And thank you, ma'am, for joining us. I'm sure the students will find this a very, very interesting session. Dr. Naveen Bali, who is a consultant with the Department of Economic Affairs, apparently for a short time, although you have contributed towards some of the earlier economic surveys as well, I believe. So it's very nice to have both of you. Thank you for accepting our invitation of having this session for the benefit of our students. I know you're both extremely busy, especially this time of year. A quick note before I hand over the mic to you, Ms. Arora. All the students who are attending, all the participants, some of you have already submitted questions, and we will raise them at the end of the presentations. But if there are any additional questions that come up, please feel free to put them in the chat box. And time remaining, time permitting, we will go ahead and raise those questions. So I will stop here, and I'll request Ms. Arora to please take over. Thank you.
Akansha is there?
Yeah. Can you see the slides that I have shared? Can you see the text? Okay.
Yes, it's visible.
Okay, so how we intend to go about it is Naveen will start, give an overview of the survey, and then I'll take over and go over the details of it. So Naveen, over to you.
Okay. Thanks for warm introduction. I just want to say a little bit more that I've done my PhD from IIT Kanpur and been working with Sir for last 3 years. So let's start with the session. Basically, what happens in kind of in economic survey, we basically divide this into two broad volumes. Let me come to the volume 2 first. So in this, basically, it is a mere hardcore data oriented, and all the data which is for the present fiscal year is been presented on this. And this is basically sector wise, and you will find that each and every chapter will have a relevance. So we start with the overall economy, and then we go towards the supply side, where it is agriculture, industry, subsidy, and then we also have analysis on the fiscal side and on the external sectors, prices, and then we also touch upon the overall social sector and their implication. And all this hardcore data has been filled in by various ministries. They give their inputs, and that's how the volume 2 has been made. Based on the live data which is there in the volume 2, and along with the future visionary for the economy, like what are the presentary need or the futuristic needs of the economy. According to that, there are various suggestions which are given to the team regarding the volume 1, and based on that, every volume will have some kind of analysis. And the way in this particular volume we have discovered is that obviously it was a COVID era, and you have to have most of your attention has been taken up by the COVID. So this year theme was based on COVID, and along with that, we also touched upon the counter cyclicality, fiscal policies, and process reform, and on the health sector. So every year there is a theme which is based on which basically develops from the present hardcore data, like which particular sectors are doing well, which are not, what kind of things are expected or being required by the economy in coming years, and accordingly the futuristic vision along with the data is used for making the volume 1. So that is the overall way how you can see that the how these two volumes are made and how they are mostly been developed. So for the detail in the survey, I'll request Kansha to take over and maybe guide us through the session.
Thank you, Naveen, for giving the overview of how economic survey is made. So what I like to do, base economic survey in itself is like a very vast document covering various sectors, various topics. So what I have done is chosen few of them which I thought you will find interesting, and which are pertinent, which are important for current economic discussion. Some of them have already been implemented in the budget or by the government, so they become more interesting as an understanding what was the philosophy behind the things that were decided by the government either during the budget or during the course of year. So I'll start with talking about India's policy response to COVID. So this is now well known that COVID has been this has been an unprecedented event that has happened and affected not just India but almost every country across the world. Before I start that, I would like to uh, bring your attention to this chart that I have displayed on the screen. Just for before I continue, can anybody just confirm that they're able to see the slides properly?
Yes, ma'am. Visible.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So basically, before I start about how India went about handling COVID, I'll just like to bring your attention to these charts that are there on your screen. So if you see GDP contraction, India did not face any GDP contraction for the last 40 years. Obviously, there were variations in the growth rates, but there was no contraction in the levels of GDP. However, the fiscal year 2021 that we're currently in is a special year because of COVID. We had a GDP contraction. Not just India, almost all the countries in the world faced contraction in GDP by different rates, but almost all countries were affected. Now, to this overall number definitely tells you that there was a contraction, but very interestingly, if you go and see the graphs that are plotted below this big graph, which show you how different sectors performed during all contraction years till the time we have data for. So starting from 1950s till today, for the entire period, you see, whenever there was a contraction, you will notice that agriculture sector was contracting and services sector was still growing. Whereas 2021 was a very, very unusual year in that sense. What happened was agriculture sector still contributed positively to the GDP. It had a growth of 3.4%, whereas industry contraction of close to 10% and services contraction of close to 9%. Whereas in any previous episode of contraction in GDP, services sector did not contract. So obviously the answer to this is no mystery. Service sector is mostly touch in lot of services are either touch incentive or intensive or they are person intensive. So for example, tourism, for example, salons, movie theaters, all these services are basically availed when you go to a particular place, interact with people, and then use them. So because of COVID, since most of these were completely shut, or even when they were not shut, restrictions were removed, people were very reluctant to go and use them. So that is how service sector shows a huge contraction in this year. How come agriculture sector still had a positive growth in this year? It is because in the initial phase, when we went about and have our national lockdown in end of March 2020, government basically in immediately realized that there was a harvest and sowing cycle that would have got disturbed if the restrictions remained same on agriculture sector. So there were for agriculture sector some relaxations were given so that the harvest and cropping cycle does not get disturbed. And obviously our agriculture being sensitive to the cycle of harvest and this thing, it was done, and you see a positive growth in agriculture sector. So this COVID, basically you see that almost all the countries in the world are expected to experience a contraction in GDP per capita. So that's like a big economic shock to the entire world. In India as well, we saw that the GDP levels contracted by close to 24% in quarter one. Quarter one is April, May, June. This is the quarter where most restrictions were imposed on the economy. There were almost a complete lockdown for the entire period, barring the last month. And then the contraction again in quarter two, the GDP declined, but the contraction has been less. So basically, you see some improvement in economic activity in Q2 as compared to Q1. So now, what I would like to, through this section, take you through is basically how India's policy responded as COVID crisis went on. So what we did, what Indian government or what the policymakers focused on, you can say that it kind of was influenced by a work of obviously various economic economists, but one particular which comes to our mind is Hansen and Sargent, which says that whenever there's uncertainty is very, very high, there is a need to minimize the losses. So just hedge for your worst case scenario. That is how your policy should focus on. In finance, we say there is a strategy called barbell strategy, which basically means that you hedge for your worst outcome and then take policy decisions on the basis of available information and data at that particular point of time. So you can say what India followed in terms of policy was very similar to a barbell strategy, which is visible in the fact that in the initial when this COVID started picking up in India, there were a lot of people which said that India, being a very densely populated country with huge population, may face real big crisis in terms of millions of people being affected and the economy being completely uh, this thing completely affected because of it. So what government did was we imposed one of the most stringent lockdowns in the word initially, to provide, to kind of hedge for the this kind of out to hedge kind to hedge for this kind of outcome. So, and gradually, as initially when COVID, you saw that the COVID cases started to pick up in India, there was a need to kind of provide for all the health facilities, PPE kits, testing kits. There was a need to make sure that all of this is available. That time of lockdown was utilized, all of things were made available, and gradually economy was then opened up. That too was very gradual. So that is broadly how the government responded in terms of restrictions in India. So when this COVID came and lockdown was announced by the government, this affected not just the demand side but the supply side of the economy as well. How did it affect both demand and supply side? So supply side, obviously, since there were restrictions, there was a labor supply shock, people could not go and work. There are a lot of production that productions could not happen, because for production people had to travel to their workplaces, meet in a particular place, which was not allowed at that time due to restrictions. So there were a lot of disruptions that happened in supply chains as well. And even the demand side was affected, because since people were not able to go out, they were not buying a lot of commodities except for essential commodities. Further, since whenever there's these kind of crisis, people are usually more reluctant and they do not want to spend on things that are beyond necessary, so they were not buying. So there was a demand side shock to the economy as well as a supply side shock to the economy. So to counter this, how government did, basically government along with RBI undertook a lot of reforms, both from fiscal side and RBI on monetary side. So since the shock was both on demand side and supply side, what we did was take measures which focus on not only demand side but supply side as well. India, for tackling the demand side, we took measures like emergency credit guarantee scheme for MSMEs, which was like government was providing a guarantee to banks so that they on lend to MSMEs, and MSMEs stay afloat for that time. They have some liquidity. Then there was this scheme of provision of food grain to a very large section of our population. Direct benefit transfers were made to some vulnerable sections of the society. These were done to cushion the initial impact on COVID on the economy. On the other hand, simultaneously, we undertook a lot of supply side measures, which were structural reforms. So they included things like uh, starting of production linked incentive schemes for 10 sectors, which was announced, apart from initial three that government had announced previously. Then government basically broadened the definition of MSMEs and brought parity between manufacturing and services. This was also a long pending reform that had to happen, and it was undertaken in this particular time. The so you have to There's a one very important distinction that I will like to bring to your notice, is that the way India responded to this crisis was quite different than how other or how most of the countries across the world did. What we did was, initially we focused on cushioning the economy so that the vulnerable section and people who are affected have some provision of basic necessities, and then gradually moved to pushing the growth. If you see the graph that is there on your screen right now, these pie charts basically tell you the mix of the stimulus measures that government was taking across this entire from March till the latest November, December. So you see that initially when COVID, when this thing, when this crisis started building up and there was a lockdown that was announced, most of the stimulus was directed towards providing food and direct benefit transfers to the poor and vulnerable section of the society. So there's one basic so economic theory tells you that when there is very high uncertainty, people have a lot of precautionary motive to save. They do not spend on things which are beyond necessary, so they will like to keep some money with themselves rather than spend all, because there's an uncertainty of how things will unfold in future. So keeping that in mind, what government was doing at that time was trying to cushion the impact. So you give people food and trying to help the MSMEs to stay afloat. And as the unlock phase started, you will see that if you move to the pie chart on May and June, you see still it was mostly liquidity support to firms and agriculture. But as you'll come to, starting from October, you see that the next tranche of stimulus mostly focused on overall demand revival. It basically focused on improving the incentives for private sector. It focused on taking measures which were investment boosting. It focused on taking measures to boost the consumption demand in the economy by various measures which I told you earlier, like production linked incentive schemes. Then government also started investing heavily in infrastructure. You'll see that the capital expenditure, government capital expenditure started to pick up heavily from October onwards. This graph basically tells you that what India did was take a step by step approach to handle COVID, which is very different from mostly one time big stimulus push that was taken by various governments across the world. What we did was kept adapting as the situation unfold in the economy. So there's another chart which will show you that initially the government expenditure, May, June, you'll see July, August, September, the capital expenditure growth was in fact negative. But there was this huge pickup in capital expenditure growth from October, November, December, which shows that government then shifted its policy and tried to spend more on investment boosting activities, capital expenditure, which will have a more to make the recovery basically resilient and not just short term consumption gains. That is, so basically we undertook a mix of stimulus measures and kept changing our or kept adapting our strategy as the situation evolved. Since these were very highly uncertain times, there was no certainty of how or in which direction this crisis is going to go. So we kept adapting our strategy in this evolving situation and tried to support the economy in this way. This was basically there's this whole chapter in economic survey. You'll see that's the chapter one of volume one primarily, which tells you how we undertook this policy response towards COVID and explains how it was beneficial at various stages of the year that has gone by. Then the next thing, which is obviously quite related to it, is so there's this big debate that was going on before this budget was presented and during the course of complete last year, that should the government let go of its fiscal targets that were set before COVID and undertake a huge expansionary fiscal policy, or should it be restrictive in that sense and not expand beyond a certain point? There were a lot of debates going on among various economists, various journalists on what will be the government strategy. Even if you remember during the last year when government came up with different tranches of stimulus measures, Atmanirbhar 1, 2, and 3, when in different tranches it came, there were a lot of debates on what should be the amount of stimulus that should be given to the economy, whether it is sufficient and whether it's not sufficient. So this survey had a complete chapter on arguing that India up till now has not been following counter-cyclical fiscal policy to the extent a lot of developed countries like UK and US has been following, and argued for a big counter-cyclical push, which was the need of the hour in this particular time that we were going through. So this is the basic that we read in our textbooks when we are doing our graduation or post graduation as well. So you basically know that the GDP in the economy is basically a sum of consumption, investment, private investment, then government expenditure on both revenue and capital side, plus the exports that you do, and imports are a drain out of GDP. So how does your what does basically counter cyclical fiscal policy mean? Counter cyclical fiscal policy mean that whenever the economy is going through a downturn or there is some crisis where either the consumption is affected or private investment is affected, then the government steps in and increases its expenditure, whether it is by or probably not by increasing expenditure but reducing tax revenues. But what essentially the government is doing, either when it contributes directly by increasing its expenditure, that means your this G that goes up, basically government expenditure goes up, that directly feeds into GDP, or whenever your taxes are reduced, that basically increases the disposable income in hands of either the consumers or gives some incentive to private sector to invest more. I'm sure all of you are aware of this thing called fiscal multiplier, which is that when government invests directly or by either by expenditure increases or by tax reduces, it basically not only affects the GDP in terms of accounting identity directly by increasing the GDP growth, it also helps. So there's also something called a risk multiplier and expectation multiplier. What does that mean? It means that whenever there is a recession going on, or whenever there is a downturn that is going on, or for example, take the example of COVID, there is a lot of uncertainty. So households usually hold back their consumption because they don't want to, take the risk of how things will unfold in the future. Private sector does not want to spend a lot because they are not they are unsure about how the demand will be. So when government spends, not only it affects directly by picking, that's a first order effect, that it increases GDP in the first order. By, so for example, they undertake a capital spending, so for example by building a bridge, building a road or whatever. So that is your direct contribution. But when you do this, it also compensates for the risk aversion of private sector. It helps boost the animal spirit, like a very famous phrase is bringing back the animal spirits of the economy. It exhibits commitment to fiscal management. It also instills some confidence in the private sector that the government is there to support it. It basically helps the remove the pessimistic expectation or sentiments of the economy. There's so that is the multiplier effect it works through. However, this graph shows you that the blue line is basically if you don't take any policy action and there is a business cycle. When you undertake a counter cyclical fiscal policy, the recession part, it just softens your recession. Basically, your recession cycle is not that deep. However, what when we were trying to analyze this, we found that if you see the three graphs that are there on the screen, one is for India, another is for UK, and the third one is for US. So if you see US's graph, the red line shows you the private sector net balance. So how much are they putting in as a percentage of GDP? And the green is the government net balance as a percent of GDP. If you see in US and UK, there is a almost minus zero point 0.9 correlation between private sector and government sector expenditure. So whenever private sector expenditure is falling uh, short basically during downturns, government has stepped in and increased its expenditure. Same is the story for UK. In India also it has happened to some extent, but the correlation is much weaker. You see it's only minus zero point 0.3. So the survey argued for a need or the benefits of having a counter cyclical fiscal policy. And as you are, I'm sure, all aware, that actually this budget did deliver on having a big fiscal expansion program to help the economy come out of this economic crisis caused by COVID. One So this seems, this is basically also what Keynes had suggested, that when the private sector is not spending because of host of reasons, government sector has to step in and help smoothen the economic cycle. One big discussion or one big question that comes out whenever people talk about counter cyclical fiscal policy is that what will happen to debt. So even when this budget was about to come, there were a lot of people commenting that government should restrain in spending because it or else it'll lead to a shoot up in the debt levels of the country. However, I like to bring your attention to this. I don't know, maybe a lot of you are aware of it, something called a debt sustainability. So, how, first of all, absolute level of debt will not tell you anything, because what matters is what is your debt as a percentage of your GDP. So, mm, di- different countries of different size can afford different absolute amount of debts because their GDP levels are different. So usually whenever any comparison it is done as a ratio of debt to GDP. It is very important to note that what affects your debt to GDP. So whenever government is, let's say, when there's a high fiscal deficit, that means you have to borrow more to finance your expenditure. So what is happening? That means you're adding to your debt, right? But how does your debt to GDP ratio evolve over the time? Depends on two major, primarily on three things. One is the amount of primary deficit, that means how much debt you are adding. So, for example, in this year, if your fiscal deficit is higher and you're going to do more borrowing, that means you'll add to your debt to GDP ratio. That is one, clear. But the second factor that affects is the rate of interest. So, if the rate of interest in the economy is going up, so here the rate of interest may be the yields on government bonds, whether they are short term or long term. If they are going up, that means the amount of payments that you have to do will be higher. So that means there'll be like a higher level of debt effectively. Secondly, if your growth rate is higher, that means not just because the denominator goes down in debt to GDP ratio, your capacity to pay also improves. So this R minus G is very important when you come about debt dynamics. If your rate of interest on the debt is basically higher than the growth, that means your debt will automatically increase. So, in case you're not taking a fiscal expansion or not raising debt because you're thinking that it will lead to like a huge pickup in debt levels or debt, it'll have implications for debt sustainability. It may not be right, because as it is, if your growth rates are low and they're lower than rate of interest, your debt levels will automatically increase. So it is important to understand that growth is key. If you have growth levels that are lower than rate of interest, as it is, your debt to GDP ratio is going to keep going up at a high pace and debt sustainability will be affected. So that is why growth is the key even in debt dynamics, and there is a need and a case for taking a counter cyclical fiscal policy when, specifically in situation like this, where the economy, not just India, all over the world, is going through a big economic crisis. So the government needs to step in. You cannot expect that, or that the private sector, either through investment, consumption, or probably through exports, will be able to take care of growth very soon, because exports are also dependent on other economies, and since all the economies are quite negatively affected this year, and with second and third wave of COVID going on in a lot of countries, that this may take a lot of time to pick up. So if this was what was recommended in the economic survey, we did this whole analysis of the fact that we don't follow counter cyclical fiscal policy enough, and there are a lot of countries which are doing it, and there is a case to do so. Budget actually delivered on that, and even in this year, the current fiscal year that is going on, 2021, the budget estimated fiscal deficit number I think was 3.5%. That was before there was any this thing of COVID. We were not anticipating this. So the target that we had set was 3.5% of GDP, but actually it went higher than 9% of GDP. This is the revised estimate for 2021. And the budget also lays out a estimate for next year as 6.8% of GDP. And for the next few years, there's a medium term trajectory where you are having a higher fiscal expansion uh, as compared to what was envisaged earlier, and keep supporting the economy in the medium term. So I hope we have some more time. Do we?
Yes, ma'am, we do have time. Please go ahead. No issues.
Okay. So this was one section which the survey uh, focused on in this year quite heavily, because it was basically the most pertinent topic in this year, and it focused on various other chapters like healthcare, which came to limelight because of this COVID crisis. There's one particular chapter or one particular topic that I like to take a few minutes to discuss with you. Why I have chosen this topic instead of probably healthcare or something else to discuss with you is because this is something that we usually do not, read or discuss in our textbooks, in our curriculum. This is slightly different approach to thinking about processes, thinking about regulation, thinking about reforms. So there's this chapter 6 in volume 1 of economic survey, which basically talks about process reforms. So what do I mean when I'm talking about this whole framework? This is basically an alternative philosophical framework for policy making. So we make a case on the fact that the real world we live in is very complex, it's very uncertain, and it's consistently evolving. Which basically COVID has, because of COVID, I think there's no doubt in anyone's mind that this is true. When we do our basic macroeconomic models, we're usually accounting for just risk and not uncertainty. Yes, we do account for in certain times, but there is a huge uncertainty in the real world that we live in. So it's not always, possible to make regulations just thinking that everything, just thinking that you'll be able to account for all possible outcomes, thinking that all the futuristic possible outcomes with their probabilities. I think I'll just go in some details. So when we were doing this analysis, we found that, India performs fairly well in following due processes for regulations, due administrative proceedings. So Word Justice Projects comes up with this, in the index, where they assess by form of questionnaires and see whether any government in any country is following all the due processes in making regulations. So we found that India does decent in terms of following all the due processes when they are making regulations, but we don't do that well in terms of how well the regulations are enforced. And that seemed to be the crux of the problem in the area that we explored. So you realize that we are following all the processes, doing all the proper, feedbacks and everything when you're making regulations with all the possible, articles, trying to go in as much details, trying to do as much analysis, but they're not that effective when you're trying to come to enforce them. So we tried to find out or think about why is that possible. One thing that we thought was important was that there are a lot of unnecessary complex regulations which may not have been, smoothened out or refined over the years. We did a study with QCI, and we found that it takes about 1570 days for a company to undergo voluntary liquidation in India. And I'm talking about a company which has no disputes, no litigations. And a lot of days out of these 1570 days are taken for clearances by various departments. Similarly, in last economic survey, we had found that just for an apparel consignment to go from Delhi to US, it takes about 41 days, whereas 20 days are spent in India only because of delays in custom clearance, transportation, and how efficient the things are at seaport. So this basically tells you that you have a lot of regulatory standards, but probably they are too complex and hence affect their enforcement. So what should be what what is the theoretical or philosophical framework of why this can happen? I think this can happen because we don't realize, or there is a need to recognize more that it is inevitable to have complete contracts and regulations when the world is uncertain. Since there is a lot of uncertainty, you cannot predict all the possible future outcomes. So future is basically unknown and also unknowable. It is not possible for anyone to be able to account for all the possible outcomes of future. Like Oliver Harton recently got a Nobel Prize for that, for the work on incomplete contracts. Regulations are also a kind of contract, not one to one, but they're like a contract. So basically, it is also not possible to have a complete regulation because you will not be able to account for all the possible diversions or non-compliance that can arise because of this. So this is a problem which we need to think about when we are making policies. So what is the when we thought that why do we make policies in this way is because everyone has a belief that if you do not make very detailed regulatory standards or regulations, there's a lot of discretion. So there is a belief that if you do not make huge detailed regulations with detailed articles, detailed sections accounting for all the possible things that can go wrong or all the possible situations that can arise, it will give discretion in the hand of policy maker or policy implementer, which obviously you want to avoid. However, this belief is flawed. Discretion and rule is not a zero sum game. In fact, there is a lot of evidence and a lot of people who have written about the fact that some discretion is inevitable, and if you over regulate, you actually end up having more discretion. So we found an example of Dodd-Frank Act. So many people said that after the global financial crisis, this was an act which was put together, to account for all the things that went wrong in financial crisis. But what happened was that you actually end up having a huge list of regulations that are either very difficult to implement, or they give a lot of discretion to the person who is implementing it to decide that which is the particular thing it gives more importance to. So it's not basically possible to get away with all of discretion. It is inevitable. Some discretion will always be there. So it may not be a good idea to keep adding more and more regulations just because you want to get the discretion away. In fact, it may do exact opposite. So what do you need? We basically need to have simple rules and regulations along with having an effective supervision. So obviously you do not also want to completely give this away. You want that the regulations are simple, but there is a proper supervision where whether those regulations are being affected properly or not can be assessed. So this all seems to be a bit, maybe not very clear in the short 5-7 minutes I have been able to give to it. But I would really urge you to go and read this because this is an alternate way of thinking and maybe very new, and maybe you'll find it interesting. I just wanted to give a broad overview of this philosophical framework that we have touched upon. In fact, you see that this argument that the regulations need to be simpler with effective supervision, there have been some policies which you will in recent times which you will say conform to the same philosophical framework. I don't know if you're aware that recently the OSP regulations of BPO sector, other service provider regulation of BPO sector, I think 2 to 3 months back they were deregulated quite heavily, with the idea that there'll be proper supervision, but you let the private sector function, and did made the regulations very simple. So if you find this topic interesting, I'll probably you can go and read more about it. I like to end with just giving you some idea about uh, how the economy is recovering. There are some signs of recovery that are already being seen in the economy in the last few months. There are a lot of, as you can see that there are a lot of indicators. So for example, your IIP and 8 core industries growth, you see that, it completely tanked in April, May when there was a complete lockdown. Slowly it started picking up, and in October, I think it actually did not contract, in fact had slightly positive growth. Similar thing happened for purchasing manager index and toll count and collection. In fact, in GST, for the first time in December, the absolute amount of GST collection was more in 2020 than in 2019, pointing towards some signs of recovery in the economy. Obviously it is still a long way to go, but we hope that the measures that have been taken in the budget and the expansionary policy and various policies of the government, specifically focusing on infrastructure and investment promotion in this year, would help aid the recovery. Thank you. So that's all for, so basically there are various other topics in economic survey. Obviously it was not possible to touch all of them in about half an hour. These are some of the ones that I thought you will find interesting. I have touched upon. Rest, I think we can open for questions and answer if people want have some queries.
Dr. Bali, is there anything more you'd like to add before we open up for questions? You're on mute, sir.
Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, no, I basically don't have to say anything extra. I think Akansha rightly pointed out that, in case of supervision, we have basically underestimated the role of supervision, and not only supervision, but the effective supervision. So what we do is that we try to think of economy more of as a mechanical way of doing it. Like you just how much petrol you want to put in your car, and how much kilometer it will go. But the economy don't work like that. We are in a system which is very complex and ever evolving, like a biological entity. So in this way, you just cannot, like already Akansha has pointed out, I'm just trying to, just restate the words. So it's just not possible for anyone to understand about you can take care of risk. Okay, there is a certain probability at what rate something bad might happen. But you just cannot take care of something called uncertainty. You just don't know about that. And whatever the regulations have been made, or whatever policy framework is mostly been worked upon the Dr.B.R. model, where we feel that we can take care of each and every possibility. And in that process, what we have, forgetting is that the effective supervision is more of, also holds its. It's just like if you are in a cricket match and you hit a ball to the leg side, you don't say that, if you hit on the leg side, I catch, it's an out. If you hit it on the offside, I'll catch, it's out. You just say that if you hit in the air, I'll catch, it's out. It's a very simple rule. So there is a role of a umpire, which is like a supervisor. But there is a more importance has to be given to the bank boards. All these boards who deliver the policy top to bottom, if they have to be more transparent. If they are transparent, the economy and the people or the policy decision maker, their work is more transparent. What happens is that leads to more trust in the system, and that trust is basically the fundamental thing that that will tell you that that the system is having a very good works in a good spirit. For example, you may have some student who work very hard for exam, but at the day of giving exam, there might be a small failure of their car and they might not be able to reach on time, and they probably, let's say, get late in the exam, and accordingly they don't perform well. So if you judge your classroom's performance based on only marks, that will be a problem. So the intent of the student or of the teacher is more relevant. So you can judge before even giving the exam whether your students and your teacher are good or not. So only delivering your results out of the results doesn't make sense, because sometimes results tend to go bad even when your intention is correct. And this is where there is the survey also, we have also just touched upon that we need to have a very robust judiciary system where we can wherever the contracts are not being able to fulfill and there is uncertainty, those things can be quickly been settled up in the courts, right? uh, every now and then maybe Supreme Court comes up with a very good judgment, but it is actually the lower level of courts that are not delivering to day-to-day requirement of the citizen. And once we can take care of this, so an a trust and transparent ex ante system where you have boards, bank boards, and where you have exposed system basically with the judiciary. If you combine these two, I think effective supervision is there, and that combined with a very simple rules and regulation where each and every citizen must understand what's going on is more better than having piling up of regulations. And this is what the spirit of this economic survey is. I think now we can just maybe take some questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Dr. Bali. All right, so we'll open up for questions now. I'll start with, like I mentioned earlier, we'll start with some of the questions that were already given to us earlier today. So I'll call on Shubhankar, please. He had a question. Shubhankar, can you please go ahead and ask your question?
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, sir. So, sir, my question is that there were some contradictions in the nominal GDP growth numbers put forward by the survey and the union budget. So the survey puts the number at 15.4% growth rate, while the union budget expects it to be 14.4%. So, did the economic survey overestimate the growth, or what possibly explains this discrepancy?
Are you talking about the nominal growth rate projections for the coming year, right? 21-22.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so see, it's as you rightly said, it's a projection, right? So how the process goes is that we within our own, like we have a big team. So how you go about it, we obviously have certain models and you will have certain assessment of how things will go about in the next year, and you come up with a projection. That's the whole point of a projection, right? You give your projection, then there are various other agencies that have given a projection. It's not about it's not an estimation. So you have to understand that it's a projection. We with our models and understanding have come up with a projection. Obviously there are various other factors that feed into it, and then final decision is taken by the right authorities as to what they think is a decent projection. So since it's not an estimation, there will always be a sum, and these are really uncertain times. It's a very evolving situation. A lot of things like how vaccination picks up, how the COVID crisis, is how COVID number cases are coming up. So there's a lot of uncertainty regarding that. So I don't think that's like a big discrepancy in such times. I mean, in such uncertain times.
Thank you, ma'am.
Also, I can also just add on to what Akansha is saying. Basically, you don't get too much fuzzy about the forecast. Forecast at the end is just a forecast, and you can just twist a little bit of one of the assumption, and you will find totally different thing. All you should be interested in knowing the direction. Whether it is if you tell if I ask you what's going to be a GDP projection, you may say let's say keep it like 5%. Or 5 to 6%, and you can also say 4 to 10%. So the confidence level as goes higher doesn't make any sense. So in this both, whatever there is small discrepancy which you feel is basically based on different assumptions. So you just look in the direction. Okay, at the end you should get a hang of it, that okay, where our economy is heading towards, and exactly what will happen, as like Akansh already said, that's an uncertain time. And forecasting is just one way to tell you the direction. So when you are lost, you would want to know bhaiya market kidhar hai, so you just go to that place and keep on searching on that. So don't go too fussy with the forecast. Everybody will do forecast in a little different way, or the spirit will be the same. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you for that. The next question is from Anamika. The point that her question was about counter-cyclical fiscal policy, which ma'am kind of discussed already, but I will nonetheless ask Anamika to please go ahead and make her point.
Okay, so my question was it is suggested to implement a counter fiscal policy. So during an economic slowdown, as of now, the total expenditure must increase. But in 2020, the planned expenditure was 30 lakh 42,230 crores, and in 2021, it is 34 lakh 83,236 crores. So this little increase may even be negative on considering the factors like inflation. So, what is the reason behind this decision by the government?
Anamika, on the top of my head, I don't recall the absolute capital expenditure or planned expenditure numbers, but as far as I remember, there is a huge pickup in fiscal overall expenditure by government. So you need to keep in mind two things. This, like I told you, this year, the current 2021, the budgeted fiscal deficit estimate was 3.5%. So you have to understand that a lot of uh, expenditure has already happened in this year. As you can see that there's a huge pickup in expenditure that has happened, and your actual fiscal deficit this year is around 9.5%, which some of it is on account of revenue shortfalls, but a lot of it is also on account of expenditure increases by government. Then in the next year, we are targeting somewhere around 6.8% of GDP, and the revenue targets have been kept like really minimal. We've done it very realistically. So there is a big pickup in expenditure there also. I think you're comparing it with this 9.5 and 6.8%. I don't remember, I couldn't recall the absolute amount of expenditure. I have to go and check that. But I think there is a huge expenditure push that has been accounted for in the budget already. So the way to compare it that this year's BE from for the next year's BE, you'll see a lot of pickup in expenditure as I think.
Okay,
Um,
ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you for that. There are two questions that come from Tess, who is one of our third year students. Tess, can you maybe go ahead and make your two questions briefly?
So my questions are based on the industry and infrastructure chapter from volume 2. My first question is the contribution of the industrial sector has been on a constant decline since 2011-12, and except for in electricity, gas, water supply, etc. It is clear that Indian industrial sector has been ailing even before the pandemic entered, and now that we have Atmanirbhar Bharat aiming to help our manufacturing sector grow up, do you think that will production linked incentive scheme, etc., will be sufficient to strengthen the sector given that the FDI to the sector has also reduced? That's my first question. My second question is about the infrastructure viability gap funding scheme aim to increase the public-private partnership in social sectors like health, education, wastewater management, etc. The sub-schemes hinted towards further commercialization of social sectors. I would like to know what you think will be the impact of the continuation of this scheme till 2024-25 on multidimensional poverty in India.
Excellent. We are more of a service economy, not established so far as a manufacturing economy. We have to understand a few of the things, and few, like already discussed in the process reform chapter, we thought about like how few of the small reforms can actually lead to hindrance. So there was some kind of reforms. Some reforms were made on in the case of labor laws, where we find out some kind of randomly, like if you have more than 100 laborers in your particular factory, you are now adhering to the labor laws just to avoid that the entrepreneur used to have another plant, right? So they were not able to get to the scale. because of all this trying to avoid all this labor laws and all these things. So that those kind of laws basically were are the one which were actually trying to not provide India a particular scale effect, which we actually wanted to. So these kind of laws were obviously abolished. A little bit work has been done in Rajasthan in the previous things and all. Apart from that, look at the case of how China has grown his special economic zones. China was very much clear about having a special economic zone in a place which is very very far away from civilization, and they create that kind of scale effect over there. In case of India, what we did is that we were among the first to introduce in Asia the special economic zone, but we were not able to implement it properly because because of rules, because every state want to have one. So there are so many special economic zones over here. There was not a scale effect coming up. And what was the fundamental things were that we were trying to keep our special economic zones close to the main cities. So what happens with that? Whenever there is a freight has to be transferred through airways or railways or roadways, they actually lead to more congestion in the actual cities. So the special economic zone actually became not that much successful over the time. And coming to this Atmanirbhar Bharat is basically now what they have realized that, okay, we want to give them some kind of scale effect. We need to have some kind of special economic zone and we need to reduce them. We need to have a more robust labor law that actually promotes people to, the entrepreneur to have more people on the board, right? So these kind of small things we have been not trying to look at really seriously. We basically started as golden quadrangle freight corridor just because China was having this Commonwealth thing in 2000, I think 9 or something, and they wanted basically India to export steel, and because of our poor roadways we were not able to do that. So what we had a lot of capacity and we wanted to do it, but in case of all these small laws we were not able to get to that our optimal level. So Atmanirbhar Bharat is basically also extension of some other success stories of special economic zone. We are borrowing. Basically what we are saying is that it's fine. You come here in my country, you come to India, you work with the local people, right? Take in the case of Motorola. In case of Motorola, was the leading manufacturing, probably the biggest manufacturing of mobiles in 1990s. They set up their first plant in Shenzhen, in China. And what all these people who are right now owning the Xiaomi, Huawei and all, they actually work with Motorola, the people of their company. They get to know within just 7 to 8 years, they learn their know-how, they know what kind of parts they want, what kind of parts goes in, where it goes in, and then they come up with they now became emerging leaders in the mobile sector, right? Same way, Atmanirbhar Bharat is not about swapping import substitution and all this thing. No, not at all. They say you're most welcome, come here, just train my guys, that's all. So now what we are trying to do is that we are trying to take over from what kind of small places where we were not able to hit hard, and we have tried to first thing is to realize what is going wrong, then only you can cure the disease. So we have find it over the time that these are the small places. So we have upgraded our labor laws. We have tried to make more robust special economic zone policy so that we can have some kind of scale effect. Now you see we are becoming one of the biggest manufacturer of electronics. So the things is that these things are changing, and you will see them changing. Other thing is about your PPP model into this social sector. I'm just trying to say basically what happens that we have this kind of notion, and yes, government will always be going to be there in this kind of sector. So I have already worked on last year in a parliament report where I worked for the CSR for Pan India work in case of this tribal areas in India. So I found out myself, I have written a report on this. So I found that, yes, all this CSR, which is actually, I will say that it's kind of, government, the corporates helping the government in this area. A government can easily say, I want to tax 1% from you guys for CSR. Nobody can say anything, but government don't want to do that. You want to encourage the habit of people to take responsibility of wherever they are owing the business. Right. So if you are a mining company, fine, go ahead and do it. Don't give me any money. I don't charge you any 1%, 2%, but it's up to you to invest for the people from whom, you are taking away the resources of. So I think that's a very good idea, and it takes a lot of burden from the government. If you look into the philosophical of 1970, you'll find that government only role is to provide social, to empower the social sector and give all these kind of things. Yes, but we now if you look into the literature, you'll find that more of the shift is towards the corporates, because the corporates are the one who actually holds a lot of good money, and they, if they have the will to do it, I think it complements the government efforts as well. I hope that replies your question. Huh? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Akanksha ma'am, is there anything you'd like to add before I go to the next question? You're muted, ma'am.
Yeah. So I just would like to add one more thing. So you see, I think that whenever you're taking some structural reforms, it takes some time to show in your results. So for example, government has been undertaking some measures to, improve the ease of doing business in the economy. Then we're trying to liberalize your FDI regime in various sectors that were quite regulated earlier. And similarly, this PLI scheme. So, like now the guidelines are being finalized, things are being operationalized. You will be giving them incentive for 5 years. So, yes, this is a work in progress. A lot of reforms are being undertaken, but it takes time for the results for these to show in your actual results. That's all. Yeah.
Uh, Thank you, ma'am. So the next question, there are two questions actually from Rakshita. She's one of our master's students. Rakshita, please go ahead and ask your questions.
Hello, sir, madam. I am Rakshita. My first question is, in Volume 1, Chapter 2 of Economic Survey 2020-2021, considers the basis of fiscal policy with reference to Oliver Blanchard's 2019 presidential address to the American Economic Association. So his view seems to run counter to our own FRBM Act. Because as present borrowing keeps increasing to repay past borrowing, this leaves little room for growth enhancing expenditure and reduces a government's credit worthiness in the eyes of lenders. So what's your view on this? This is my first question. Second question is that the increased tax burden due to excise duties on, say, petrol, which directly or indirectly rises the price of commodity, does this help in growth in the current scenario? Thank you.
So your first question on FRBM Act. So yes, you had an FRBM Act. There were deficit targets that were laid out, but this COVID is a very big, unprecedented event that happened. You were not anticipated for it, or even thought of in your vaguest of the ideas also. So at this time, what was required was a big fiscal push, and that is what the government has exactly done. You've not following your the fiscal path that you had already thought of, but instead you've taken a big fiscal spending program. As far as I understand the budget numbers, I think there is a lot of room of expenditure that is being done, not just on the interest payments, but a lot on even capital expenditure. So that even answers your quality aspect of expenditure. You are not just doing expenditure either to meet your last year debt obligations or just to pay out, salaries and subsidies. We have already started taking a lot of capital expenditure starting from October onwards. For some months, the growth, year on year growth, has been like above 100%, in fact. And the plans for next year include a big infrastructure and investment push for railways, roads, ports, a lot of capital expenditure. So they all have a multiplier effect on growth. So not only directly, but they will affect your growth positively, even indirectly. So I think, and like I explained you, that R minus G is important. See, if you're not spending because you think you don't want to add to debt, but that affects your growth rate. And if your growth rate is affected, you, as it is, your debt becomes unsustainable, or you go towards increasing of debt. So that balance, it is important to understand that it is not just the amount of debt, but that gap between rate of interest and growth is very important to keep your debt sustainable. So I think that hopefully that answers your first question. Naveen, if you want to add something.
You're on mute, sir.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. Basically, Akansha has rightly summed up everything. I'm just gonna say the same thing, but in a different way. Basically, just look into this. If you just take your economy as your own household, and at the time of distress, we are supposed to take loans. But these loans can be taken for two things. If you're taking for consumption, that's a problem. If you're taking for investment, then that's a good thing. Why it's good thing is because, see, today the government is take an example of the financial crisis of 2008. At that time, I think there was a notion that you can just give helicopter money to people and compensate them. But this government, I think, mostly has not gone with that idea. He said that by just giving helicopter money, you are only inviting inflation in your economy. You have to do the work. So in this case, what has happened is that basically whatever the additional debt the government is taking, it's taking to work on their own infrastructure. Take an example of national infrastructure pipeline. So when the people go and they work in that, they earn some money out of it. It's better to let the people earn money from the borrowed money. What happens that they generate some income, and if you are able to generate the income, then what will happen? It is easy for you to pay the debt, even though it is higher, right? So if you are not taking any this kind of policy, you are trying to reduce the debt in a fear, saying that who will pay the interest payment in the coming years. What you are doing is actually you are crippling your economy's ability to earn the money in the future as well, right? So in that way, when you as a government take this initiative and say, okay, let's build some bridges, let's make some roads, and there is so many over 7,000 projects been in the news for national infrastructure pipeline alone. If we can finish those projects quickly, that multiplier effect can kick in. That will create more income in the economy from this borrowed money than what we actually have to pay as an interest, right? Make sense or not? Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, if you don't have to say yes just because I am here. If you are convinced, then you say yes. If you don't, you can say no, I don't agree. So it's the basic idea that you want to use this money for some kind of infrastructure, mostly. And yes, you want to take care of your vulnerable section that Akansha has already shared. So I'm not saying all those things again. But the basic idea is to not let the earning ability of your country in future to go down. Okay, so you don't want to shrink your fiscal. Okay, thanks.
Thank you for that. The next two questions come from our youngest students, undergrad first years. The first one is from Shalini Mishra. Shalini, please go ahead and ask your question.
Good afternoon, sir, ma'am. So actually, ma'am, my question is from volume 1, healthcare. It has been mentioned 4 times in the chapter, healthcare takes center stage, that an increase in the public health expenditure from the current level of 1% to 3% of the GDP can reduce the out-of-pocket expenditure from 65% to 30%. So my question is, what were the factors considered while calculating this estimate?
Um,
Uh, Shalini, really sorry, I will not be able to help you on this question because none of us have worked on that chapter. So basically, the exact calculations that were done or the factors that were considered in the regression. So since we are a team of like few people, so our other colleagues have worked on that chapter. So sorry, we'll not be able to answer that question right away. But you free to write to us, and we can forward your question to the team members who have written it, who can guide you on that.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you for that offer, ma'am. I'm sure more of our students will probably pick you up on that offer, even though you made that offer only to Shalini. Okay. The next question, there are actually a couple of questions from Praful, also a first year undergraduate student. Praful, go ahead.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, ma'am, and sir. My question is regarding the PLI scheme. Which tells that incentives are to be granted under this PLI scheme. Uh, Under this PLI scheme, so the one extreme of this scheme says that products may be fully manufactured in India, and the other extreme says that all the inputs of that product should be imported, and then assembled. So while one end qualifies for this PLI scheme, the other doesn't. Uh, so in the range of these cases, where between some inputs may be imported, some may be manufactured domestically, or some may be assembled. Uh, some may be assembled domestically. Where can the line be drawn? That's my first question. My second question is regarding the education sector, the on quality education for all, in as said in the economic survey. So I would like to know if what plans are being considered to encourage higher education. Now, higher education. I would particularly like to know about vocational education, technical, or general education among among the rural youth. That's my second question, and my third question I would like to finish with is regarding regarding this industrial expansion plans of the of ports and shipping. The Sagarmala project, as said in the as I read in the economic survey. I would like to know if there is a study to evaluate the impact of the industrial expansion plans on the marine ecology, and also on the traditional fisherman community. So I would like to I would like you to answer my questions. Thank you.
On your PLI scheme, I'll just I'm not obviously I've not directly worked on these, but as far as my understanding goes, I like to you have to understand one basic difference. So, what is a production linked incentive scheme? You are basically incentivizing some producers so that they commit some amount of capital expenditure that they will do in your country, set up some greenfield projects, and produce some certain commodities in which you have given these incentives. So the idea behind this scheme is that the production should happen here. Why are we doing that? Like one of your friends just asked the question that we are not doing that good in manufacturing. Yes, we are not. So you basically incentivizing people to come and manufacture here. So the idea is to promote India as a manufacturing center of certain identified commodities which we think are important or in which we can compete. So that is why that condition has to be there, that you come here, do some basic minimum committed, a capital expenditure, and then do some production here. As far as I am aware, each sector, so there's this list of 10 sectors in which PLI will be given that was announced. And then there's a technical committee which goes through and creates guidelines for each specific sector. And I think they're not uniform across sectors. So you'll have to go through each particular expenditure finance committee report or technical committee report and see the guidelines that they come up with. But the broad idea is that some manufacturing has to happen here. That's the whole idea about incentivizing production here. They have to set up some greenfield projects here, they have to commit some capital investment here. But for the details of sector by sector, you may have to go through the details guidelines on PIB or the ministry. I'm not aware of the sector by sector guidelines. Secondly, on your next question on again, I will have to ask you, I have to connect you to the person who actually worked on it. I'm not aware of the details of the project on Sagarmala or the vocational study measures that you're saying. I'm aware that government has been undertaking some, measures for promoting higher education. I don't know if you're aware, there's something called a MOOC platform, a Swayam platform. They were launched by the government, which are platforms to promote higher education. In fact, we ourselves did one course on Swayam with our former CA. So basically, that is a platform where a lot of courses are offered so that people who don't have access to, who are not able to get access directly to all these universities and excellent programs that are going on are able to take benefits. And there are other initiatives like Gyan, global initiative academic networks, where you know experts of different areas provide certain lectures, and people who are not enrolled in those universities also are able to take benefits. Some of these measures are there that I'm aware of, but I'm not aware of the detail of each and every measure that has been undertaken. I don't know, Naveen, would you like to add something to it?
Yeah, sure. Basically, I'll just mostly again gonna be touching your first question most of the time, because I'm also not work directly for education sector so far or with other. See, I'll not gonna even discuss about the. I'll just talk about the spirit. Okay. Now, I'll again wanna take you back to the success story of China. Now, what happened in China? Take an example back for Motorola. You can take other examples as well. I'll give you Motorola example. The Chinese government has a very specific policy, and that policy is that you can set up a plant in China. That's not a problem. I'll give you tax free, whatever you want to do parties, whatever you want to do, I don't care. The only thing is that you have to have your linkages. For example, you need a processor, you need a plastic, somebody to make plastic body, somebody to make keypads, right? You need to involve the domestic companies, local companies of China origin with them. What's the reason behind it? The reason is simple. Like, you can have Motorola here, you can buy all the parts from US, which was a Motorola, not Motorola, so I think Finland. So you can buy all the parts from there and you can just assemble here. That doesn't give any technological transfer to my country, right? You're just using my land, getting free of cost, everything, free electricity, free tax and everything. And you're not even going to share any technology with my indigenous supplier, then that's not acceptable. Even though the supplier of domestic origin of China, he will say that, okay, you are into semiconductors, please give me some transistors. Chinese company at that time may say that I don't even make transistor, are you kidding me? Then government says you as a Chinese government can go and import from Finland. That's not a problem. But Motorola directly cannot do it. The simple reason that even when you're buying the transistors from Finland, you at least know now, हाँ इसमें transistor लगते हैं और कितने लगते हैं. Do you understand that? And that is how slowly the technology seepens into your indigenous market. Else why not India has been one of the was not able to do all these things. You understand that? So that's the spirit behind it, that you make in India. We are not going to stop you saying that this is made in India, Micromax, and this is Apple. I don't care. I just want my people to understand how these things are made, so that in future, tomorrow, some of your employees tomorrow can become some entrepreneurs. And they can have their own Indian brand. Why not? And they should be world-class Indian brand. Until unless I don't know what is inside, I can't do reverse engineering. Make sense? Make sense? That's the spirit about it, but I don't go into detail. I have not read that exactly, my friend. But that's the whole spirit, that you give some kind of my young people who are there, who have been engineers, they should have some kind of exchange of technology with them. In the long run, 5 to 10 years, they may be able to, we will be able to do it our own. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. So, looks like there is one question from Oshin. Oshin Alok, would you like to go ahead and answer this? Go ahead and ask your question. Just half a minute. I think she'll be on. Okay, so I'll go ahead. She's put her question in the chat box, so I'll go ahead and ask her question. I'll go ahead and ask her question. The forbearance measures of 2008 crisis extended well till 2015, and the aftershocks were still being felt with every time high NPAs by 2019, and now COVID brought another round of restructuring forbearance, and with the oncoming wave might extend well till 2022. Who is to say? So how do we plan to mitigate these bad loans, which is bound to increase again? And does it make privatization an inevitable post-forbearance measure? And does it put the government in the compromising position to sell the assets even at undervalued costs? That's the question. Would either of you like to please take that?
So about forbearance, see, right now, you have to understand that yes, there is a time when you have to take away the forbearance measures, but they're also important in that particular time. So what forbearance measures were taken when this COVID crisis came? You had given a loan moratorium to people for first 3 months, then extended to 3 months. That was very important in times of COVID, when people were facing, some of them may be facing job losses, no manufacturing was happening. It may be very difficult for either people or firms to repay or pay their loan installments. So that was an important forbearance step that you were taking. Then in IBC also there were some. It was the system was put in abeyance. You had put some limits on when can you call this firm as insolvent. So yes, there are some forbearance measures that were undertaken that will have some repercussions when you start recognizing that. But it is also, you have to understand that it is important that those measures were taken at that point of time. They were the need of the hour. That is why they were taken. Yes, there will be few challenges when this forbearance measures are taken away and there more recognition of NPAs or the assets that are in trouble. But government has been taking some measures. They have improved the regulation and supervision of banking sector. Then this DFI has been announced in this budget. So I think measures are being taken to tackle the situation as good as possible without the least disruptions to the financial market.
Okay, Ocean, is your question answered? Are you able to access the mic or video?
Yes,
Oh,
yes, ma'am. It was
okay.
well answered.
And
Thank you.
okay, thanks for your question, Ocean. Sagar, I think one of your questions was a little bit related. Do you want to, is it addressed? But I think you had one more question. If you want to go ahead and ask, please do.
Sheetal, we may have to wind up in like another couple of minutes. It's
Sure.
3:30. I have to rush to another meeting at
Ha.
3:45.
That's perfectly fine. In fact, that was going to be my next question to you if you have a couple of minutes. But you did offer to accept questions by email. So
Yeah.
that's open to some more, because there are a few other students who have requested to put their questions to you through email. Would that be okay?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think if they can just put it as a broad policy request or something, it will be better. If it's about numbers and all, I think then we have not worked on volume 2 as much as you guys might be thinking. So then we have to get to some other people. So if it can restrict to policies, like what, why, and how, any rationale, will be most than happy to reply.
Excellent, excellent. So we'll go ahead and close now. The
Sheetal,
students
I
who,
would just like to say one thing before you close.
yes,
I
ma'am.
am extremely, extremely happy and amazed to see how many of your students have actually read the economic survey. I can't tell you how happy it makes me, because
Yeah.
I've been working in this document from 2014 onwards. And sometimes when you're writing it, you don't know how many people are reading it or how well it is taken. So this session, at least the thing that I take away is that yes, some people have read it and they found it useful. I'm really, really thankful and
Ma'am,
happy.
you can be very sure a lot more people have read it, not just some.
So that was really I really felt happy after getting these questions. I may not have been able to answer all of your questions, but at least it shows that effort has been done by them to really read it in depth. So
No,
that's like
absolutely. No,
a good.
on our end, we definitely try to get the students, as part of our courses, we try and get the students to read parts of, sometimes we assign chapters to them and give little quizzes and, but we try not to make it absolutely compulsory, but the younger ones are still getting introduced to economics. So this is their way of really learning the ropes.
Learning it. Okay, that's
Yeah,
great.
I just want to say one small thing on this as well. Like I have also been teaching for a while before I came here and work with these wonderful people. I also been, whenever I'm teaching any topic, I always teach them twice. One is for the sake of getting marks, because in some university you have to write in a specific way because you cannot get marks, and if you can't get marks, then that's end of story. But there is another way to teach the same topic so that they are goodly well equipped for their interviews. So that's something, if you are, I can literally see that, you have kind of nice mix going on here, and that's very good for the students.
I sure hope so. I sure hope so. Bhanumurthy sir, is there anything you would like to add?
No, I mean, it was a really interesting session, and let me thank both of you. I know Bipin will have a formal vote of thanks.
Yes.
Don't take much time because they have to leave, but certainly we'll be in touch with both of you, and I think there'll be a lot of questions coming to you through email. Yeah.
Most welcome.
Yeah.
Okay, then
Thank you.
without having much delay, I'll give the vote of thanks. As you rightly said, some of our students literally went through the entire economic survey. It was a part of their assignment. At least for the first years, it was a part of their assignment to go through the economic survey and the union budget and see, see whether the union budget actually, borrowed some ideas from economic survey and implemented it. And we, the students and faculty at BASE, are happy to have hosted two representatives from the economic division who played a role in preparing the economic survey, which focused on saving lives and livelihood. That was the hashtag that was used. And we had Akansha Arora speaking in detail on the policy response by the government of India as well as RBI, and how the response was different when compared to other countries. Moreover, it was very interesting to see how the concepts that most of the students and we teach and from the textbooks are really applied in the policy making. Really good to see those equations, getting involved in policy making. Specifically, the counter-cyclical policy, how it helped in cushioning the economy at the time of crisis, and of course the debt dynamics. Thank you, Akansha, for the insightful talk on the policy framework and the issues associated with policies and the reforms in India. Then we had Dr. Naveen also talking on the concerns in addressing the regulations in India and highlighting the importance of transparency and trust in the system. And you try to give a different perspective to some of the concepts put forward by Akansha, and that helped us to get an overall picture, right? And it was really insightful. Thank you, Naveen. And I thank all the participants from BASE as well as others from other institutions across the country for attending this session, specifically the students who read the economic survey thoroughly and prepared some questions. Okay, and I'm sure that the Q&A session was helpful and you have got your answers. If not, they're going to help you out to get answers. Okay. Before I wind up, the BASE University has a few more interesting events coming up. We shall keep you updated about it. Follow our Twitter handle BASE_university for more updates. Okay. So
Sure.
with this, we shall conclude this meeting. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you so much. Thank
Thank
you
you
so
so
much.
much. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.